What is going on, everyone? This is Eric coming at you from just outside of Hartford, Connecticut. And today we are going to be discussing the long awaited video here of the history of the New York Yankees. So, like I said, this video has been long overdue. I've been trying to get this video to happen for, I think it's since late May, early June. And here we are in the middle of November, finally getting it. So I'm excited. This is going to be a long video, so I just don't want to have the camera on just because it's a longer video. They are doing some construction work outside my house today, so if we hear noises, I do apologize in advance. This is like the only time I've really had to actually do this history of video, so I'm in a little bit further away from the road today, but we still might hear noises. Again, I apologize for that in advance. But without further ado, let's jump into the video. This is the history of the New York Yankees MLB franchise. So, in 1901, this was the first year that the American League came to existence. And as part of the American League growing, they placed a team in Baltimore, Maryland. So this team would be called the Orioles, and they would play their home games at Oriole Park 4. And this park was also nicknamed the American League Park. Now, their first year, they were okay. They weren't great, but they weren't bad. And then their second season, they were complete garbage, a hot mess, complete disaster. So the team's manager, John McGraw, he ends up leaving during the season to manage the NL's New York Giants. So this isn't 2020 baseball. This is 1902 baseball. So what McGraw does, is he ends up taking a ton of players with him from the Orioles, pretty much anyone who was halfway competent as a player. And the president of the AL had to step in and essentially avoid the team the team completely collapsing and folding. So he had to ask other American League teams to give up players to the Orioles. Now, obviously, you're not going to get good players when you're getting rejects from other teams, especially again in 1902 baseball. 2020 reject teams could be pretty good, but 1902, no, not at all. So the only time that this had happened this had only happened, I should say, because the team was forced to forfeit a game because they didn't have enough players to field a team. Because again, McGraw took anyone who was halfway competent with him to the Giants. So, needless to say, the Orioles finished last in the American League, both in the standings and attendance. So, following the 1902 season, as we've discussed before, the American League and the National League reached an agreement that let the two conferences cooperate, and this would lead to the World Series being played. So, part of this agreement was that the American League was allowed to expand into New York City, which was at that point predominantly just National League. And the Orioles were purchased by new owner, William Devery. And this man was known as the first ever chief of police in New York City, and another guy named Frank Farrell. So the two of them would, with their New York City ties, move the team to New York City, and they would rename the team the New York Highlanders. So at this point, I do have to point out that this Baltimore Orioles team, it's kind of like random. So some say that this Orioles team folded and the Highlanders were an expansion team awarded to New York. Others say that the Highlanders were relocated from Baltimore. Others say that they purchased the team, got rid of the Orioles, and bought the Highlanders. It's a complete mess. Again, this is 1902, 1903. Not everything is properly documented. And obviously, there's no one alive that you can ask what happened. So, yeah, I do have to point that out there. So, this Orioles team, obviously, it's not tied to the modern day Baltimore Orioles. And the New York Yankees do not take anything with it. They just kind of look at it and they're like, oh, well, did that happen? We don't know. It's very contested. So nobody really claims this 1901, 1902 Baltimore Orioles team. But so in 1903, the Highlanders would play their games at American League Park, which was more commonly known as Hilltop Park due to its location. It was on top of a hill, obviously. So The move to New York allowed the team to redefine its identity. So what they did is they acquired starting pitcher Clark Griffith to be the team's player manager. They were also able to sign outfielder Willie Keeler and starting pitcher Jack Chesbro. So the team was okay in 1903, but 1904 the team had a very good season, led by Chesbro's 41 wins. Now, believe it or not, that is the AL record for wins in a single season, and that record, 41 wins in a single season, will never be broken the way baseball is being played nowadays. So the Highlanders finished 1.5 games behind the Boston Americans for the AL pennant, and this was after they lost a crucial series to the Americans late in the season. Now, as we mentioned in the Boston Red Sox video, uh, basically the Giants had cruised their way to an NL pennant, and it looked like the Highlanders were going to win the AL pennant, so they refused to play the World Series. So this because they didn't want to give legitimacy to the Highlanders, and that's why we don't have a 1904 World Series. Real quick history lesson there. So in 1905, the Highlanders regressed dramatically, and this was due to multiple injuries. But in 1906, they found themselves back in the race for the pennant. And this time, with less than 2 weeks remaining in the season, they held on to first place in the American League. However, the team would get passed by the Chicago White Sox and would finish second in the American League for the second time in 3 years. The team fell down again in 1907, 1908, struggling. And after the 1908 season, Clark Griffith would leave the Highlanders to manage the Cincinnati Reds. The 1909 season did not fare much better for the team. And towards the end of the season, starting pitcher Jack Chesbro was waived by the Highlanders. And after the season concluded, Willie Keeler left the team. So the 1900s were not too kind to the Highlanders organization. They had finished second in the AL twice, but that was pretty much it. No pennants were won in the 1900s. Now we enter the 1910s. And the Highlanders had a decent 1910 season, finishing second in the American League, but the team just kind of was there and they didn't have any superstars. So they started to decline after that. So the team continued to change its managers frequently, and this was mostly due to the managers clashing with players and American League presidents. The American League president at the time was a very strict person, and if you kind of had this leniency or you were a strict guy as well, you wouldn't get along with them. Believe it was Ban Johnson at that time. So, uh, at this point, after an uneventful 1911 season, 1912 would be a year to remember for the ball club. So this was the year where the team added its iconic pinstripes to their uniform. And obviously, to this day, the vast majority of people associate pinstripes with the New York organization. Now, they also had allowed the New York Giants to play in their ballpark, Hilltop Park, after the original Polo Grounds, which is, of course, the Giants' home stadium, had suffered fire damage. So the team didn't do well. They finished dead last in the American League, going an abysmal 50 and 102. Now, following the 1912 season, the Highlanders would leave Hilltop Park and move to the Polo Grounds to become the tenants of the New York Giants. After moving to the new stadium, the Highlanders officially changed their nickname from Highlanders to the New York Yankees. After two more disappointing seasons, the Yankees were sold to two more individuals named Jacob Rupert and I apologize if I mispronounce his name, Tillinghast Lehemu Hudson. Now Hudson was actually not a general, but he was a higher rank in the military in the U.S. military. I believe it was Army. So just a little interesting thing. And after the sale was complete, Jacob Rupert, who essentially becomes the face of the two owners, he's like the bigger, more known one. He would call the Yankees, quote, an orphan ball club without a home of its own, without players of outstanding ability, without prestige, end quote. So the team had not been profitable at all up to this point. Just interesting to note. So during the 1915 season, the Yankees would acquire starting pitcher Bob Shockey from the Philadelphia Athletics. Now, despite this move, the team still finished in the bottom half of the American League. Before the 1916 season, the Yankees would trade for third baseman Home Run Baker. Now, the team would respond well to these two moves, and they had a strong start to the 1916 season. But towards the end of the season, they started dealing with multiple injuries to key players, and they missed out on the pennant yet again. After a rough season in 1917, the Yankees would fire their manager. And Hudson, one of the two owners, would go off to fight in Europe during World War One at this point. So Rupert would hire Miller Huggins to manage the ball club. Now, Hudson did not like this at all. He didn't like Huggins. He wanted a different person. And this would end up driving a wedge between the two co owners. And the following season saw the Yankees contend for the American League pennant yet again. But as many teams also had, a lot of their players were drafted to fight in World War One. And the Yankees seemed to lose more of their key players. So the team began to plummet in the standings, and they dropped to fourth place by the end of the season. In 1919, most of their players came back at this point, and they improved slightly, but they still didn't make the pennant. They still didn't win a pennant. And the Yankees made a move on December 26th, 1919. And this one move would completely change the franchise and alter the history of another franchise for 70, 80 years, 84 years, whatever it is. The Yankees would acquire outfielder slash starting pitcher Babe Ruth from the Boston Red Sox in exchange for cash. The amount is disputed to this day. It's believed to be 25,000 or 100,000, depends on who you ask. So we're gonna say 100,000. Give Boston a little bit of a benefit of the doubt there. And it's needless to say at this point, good times were on the way. So now we enter the 1920s. Up to this point, the Yankees have zero AL pennants, zero World Series titles. So, the Yankees, headlined by Babe Ruth, would finish third in the American League in 1920. Now, the addition of Ruth actually helped to attract fans to the ballpark, and the Yankees became the first team in MLB history to draw over 1 million fans in a single season. So Ruth ends up shattering the MLB single season home run record, formerly at 29, with 59. He more than doubled the previous record. Shortly after the 1920 season concluded, the Yankees would hire Barrow as GM. One of his very first moves saw the team trade for pitcher Wade Hoyt. The Yankees had a very strong season in 1921, winning their first AL pennant, and they would actually be matched up against their crosstown rivals and stadium sharing team, the New York Giants. Now, unfortunately for the Yankees, they would lose the World Series 5 games to 3. Still, they played well. They proved that they're a legitimate team. Now, in 1922, Hudson, one of the two owners, would sell his half of the Yankees to Rupert. So at this point, Jacob Rupert is the only owner of the New York Yankees. And the team played well again that season, once more topping the American League. Unfortunately, they would be matched up against the New York Giants in the World Series yet again, and again they would fall. This time, 4 games to 1. Weird old baseball was weird. They would have these random best of 9 series and then a best of 7 series. So, as the season concluded, or after the season concluded, Home Run Baker would retire from baseball. So prior to the 1923 season, the Yankees would move to their newly constructed ballpark, Yankee Stadium. Babe Ruth went on to hit the first home run in this new stadium, leading to many calling the stadium the house that Ruth built. During the 1923 season, first baseman Lou Gehrig would make his MLB debut. Now, the Yankees, led by the AL MVP winning Babe Ruth, once again won the AL pennant for the third time in the decade, and the third time in a row. And for the third time in a row, they were pitted against their crosstown rival, New York Giants. This time, the Yankees would emerge as the victors. So finally, after 3 tries, the Yankees win their first World Series over the Giants. And the Yankees would narrowly miss out on the AL pennant in 1924, But in 1925, the team would just completely collapse, finishing seventh in the AL, which is insane to think about with the fact that the team had Ruth and Gehrig. So in 1926, second baseman Tony Larazzi made his debut, and the Yankees would rally to win the AL pennant again in 1926, but they would lose in the World Series. So the 1927 Yankees are considered to be one of the most intimidating offenses in Major League history. So this team's offense was nicknamed Murderers Row due to their power hitting. So the elite offense led the Yankees to a 110 and 44 record, which always puts them in consideration for the best team in Major League history. And obviously, a 110-44 record was more than enough to win the American League. So Babe Ruth again set the home run record for in a single season with 60, narrowly breaking his old one. Lou Gehrig added an additional 47, and he recorded 147 RBIs. So the Yankees would meet with the Pittsburgh Pirates in the World Series, and the Pirates were no match. Yankees swept them 4 games to 0. So, like I said, this team is considered to be the greatest team in Major League Baseball history, according to many. And after the season, Bob Shockey would leave the Yankees. Now, during the 1928 season, catcher Bill Dickey would make his debut. And the team started off the 1928 season with a bang and went on to win the AL pennant once again. They again would sweep the World Series, winning their second consecutive title and third title of the past 4 years. So the Yankees would fall to second in 1929. And in September of 1929, manager Miller Huggins would pass away from an illness. Now, this obviously doesn't bode well for a team like the Yankees, where your manager is one of the big names. But so in the 1960s, or the 1920s, sorry about that. In the 1920s, the Yankees won 6 AL pennants and 3 World Series in 1923, 1927, and 1928. So now we enter the 1930s. And during the 1930 season, the Yankees would release pitcher Waite Hoyt. Now they would also trade for pitcher Red Ruffing and saw the debut of pitcher Lefty Gomez. Now the team finished third in the American League that season, and they would hire manager Joe McCarthy for the 1931 season. In that season, they would finish second in the American League. So the Yankees would return to the World Series in 1932, where they would meet with the Chicago Cubs, and just like they had done the past 2 World Series visits they'd made, they swept the Cubs with ease, winning them their third consecutive World Series title. So the 1932 World Series is famous for Babe Ruth's called home run, the called shot during Game 3, where he points to center field and he hits the home run. Everybody has seen the video of it. There's a lot. You could probably write a paper about the called shot if you wanted to. So, very iconic moment in Major League Baseball history. And with that home run, he obviously proceeded to break a 4-4 tie, and it all but swung the series in the Yankees' favor. So, with the Great Depression starting to kick in, the Yankees were forced to offset some of the players to save money. Now, essentially, it was just guys who were good role players, but role players are key. You need good role players to win games and win championships. So the team, while it didn't suffer all that much, it did suffer, and they finished second in the American League for 3 consecutive years, 1933 to 1935. So the biggest move that the Yankees would make during this time occurred prior to the 1935 season when they would trade away Babe Ruth to the Boston Braves. Now, this move was to allow Ruth to ideally manage the Braves. And at this point, he had made it open that, he had openly discussed it that he wanted to be a manager. And it was apparent at this point that he would never be the Yankees manager. So basically, the problem with Babe Ruth was he just really he had it's well documented that he was a big partier. He always had, a drink with him or something. And the Yankees are like, we don't want this guy as our manager. He's showing up to these games hungover. We don't want that as our manager. This is the New York Yankees. We are not allowed to do that. And so they just said, you know what? We got to trade him. We don't want to sour the relations with this guy. It's going to hurt, but we got to trade him. So they traded Ruth to the Boston Braves. And again, it was ideally because they wanted Ruth to be a manager, as he was very close with Jacob Rupert at this point. They both had the German ancestry, and they just wanted to keep Babe happy. So in May of 1936, outfielder Joe DiMaggio would make his debut. Obviously, DiMaggio replacing Ruth, that helps you a lot. So the addition of DiMaggio to an already strong elite lineup helped the Yankees return to the World Series, where they would go on to meet the New York Giants and beat them 4 games to 2. Again in 1937, the Yankees would have a great regular season, win the AL pennant, make the World Series, and they would again win, this time 4 games to 1. Following the 1937 season, second baseman Tony Lazzari was released by the team. The Yankees would meet the Cubs in the 1938 World Series and would sweep them. Now, the joy of winning 3 consecutive World Series was short lived, however. So, in January of 1939, the team's longtime owner, Jacob Rupert, passed away. And to make things worse, on May 2nd, 1939, Lou Gehrig took himself out of the Yankees lineup, ending his Iron Man streak at 2,130 games. So he had played in 2,130 games consecutively. Now, this was because he was really struggling. He just did not look good. And in June, it was announced that he was suffering from ALS, which obviously put an end to his playing career. Really sad. He had looked really good up to this point, and then all of a sudden he just started struggling mentally. He lost his power. He was hitting barely above 100, so he took himself out. And on July 4th of 1939, they Yankees would hold a Lou Gehrig Appreciation Day. So the festivities were very emotional, obviously, and heartfelt. So he would give his speech, and he gave the speech saying, quote, "I consider myself the luckiest man on the face of the earth." So this was a very emotional day. You can see the speech online. I definitely would recommend it if you haven't seen it already. Very heartfelt, very emotional. And despite the two tragedies, the Yankees would really just rally as an organization and would again win the American League pennant in a dominant fashion. They would meet the Cincinnati Reds in the World Series and would sweep them, ending the 1930s with 4 consecutive World Series championships. So in the 1930s, the New York Yankees had won 5 AL pennants and all 5 World Series in which they participated: 1932, 1936, 1937, 1938, and 1939. So here we are, like the 24 minute mark, and we're still only in about to begin the 1940s. Again, this is going to be a longer video. So now we're in the 1940s, and at this point, due to the Yankees' just complete domination of the league, the American League would actually place a temporary freeze on any and all transactions between the pennant winner and any other ball clubs. This was because what the Yankees would do is they would buy players from other organizations. So let's just say, especially in the Great Depression, if you're the Philadelphia Athletics, which this is one of the teams that they really trade with, what the Yankees would do is they would step in and be like, "Hey, you know that player you have that's hitting pretty well? Yeah, we need a left fielder. How's about you give us him and we'll give you this player and $100,000." And most teams took it because they needed the money. So this move was to offset the Yankees so they could not just keep buying players from other teams, because a lot of teams are struggling with money. Boston was another one. Boston and Philadelphia were the two teams that really kept trading with the Yankees because they had good relationships with the owners. So the team ends up finishing a close second in 1940, obviously not winning the AL pennant. And during the 1941 season, Joe DiMaggio would have his famous 56 consecutive games with a hit streak. Very famous. Everybody's heard about it. It's one of those records that's probably never going to get broken. We might see it, but I don't know if it'll happen in our lifetimes. So what happens at this season is we also would see the debut of shortstop Phil Rizzuto. And the Yankees, led by Joe DiMaggio, would return to the World Series, where they would defeat the Brooklyn Dodgers 4 games to 1. In 1942, the team would again win the World Series, the AL pennant, but they would lose in the World Series to the St. Louis Cardinals 4 games to 1 again. So the 1943 season saw the Yankees undergo some changes. Joe DiMaggio would enlist to fight in World War II. So the Yankees kind of said, we might be in trouble here. So they traded away pitcher Lefty Gomez. And during the season, three key players, Bill Dickey, Phil Rizzuto, and Red Ruffing, were all drafted to fight in World War II. Now, despite all the changes, the Yankees still managed to win the American League. Now, these are some key players that are gone, and they still managed to win the AL. So they avenged their previous season's World Series loss to the Cardinals by turning the tables on them, beating the Cardinals 4 games to 1. Now, the team fell to third in 1944, where the changes really started to kick in, and more of their players, again, not stars, but good key core backup players, were drafted to fight in World War II. In summer of 1944, Red Ruffing would return from the fighting overseas, and the team really didn't respond well, but they would fall to fourth in the AL. After the season, Ed Barrow would retire from his role as general manager. On the bright side, Joe DiMaggio, Phil Rizzuto, and Bill Dickey all returned from World War II as the war had ended at this point. So the team was sold after the 1945 season from the estate of Jacob Rupert. And the new ownership decided to upgrade Yankee Stadium, which included the installation of lights. Now, why does this matter? Because now you can play night games. And if you can play night games, guess what? That's more revenue coming your way. So during the 1946 season, manager Joe McCarthy would resign from the team, and this was due to his bouts with alcohol. So he really started going off the deep end when it came to his drinking, and he decided to resign rather than be fired. Because that was kind of the stipulation he was given. He ends up going overseas. He ends up, going into program, but so Yogi Berra would make his debut. Catcher Yogi Berra would make his debut during the 1946 season. After the season ended, Bill Dickey would retire and Red Ruffing was released. So while they lost Bill Dickey, Yogi Berra steps right in, continuing a mini dynasty for the Yankees at this point of elite catchers. And the team once more had a great season in 1947, which ended in another World Series victory. This time, it took them 7 games to knock off the Brooklyn Dodgers. After a third place finish in 1948, the Yankees would hire Casey Stengel to be the manager of the club. So in Stengel's first season as manager, the team would deal with numerous injuries, but they found themselves only a game out of the AL pennant, with a doubleheader scheduled against the team in first place, the Boston Red Sox. The Yankees would sweep the doubleheader, winning the AL crown. Now, this team would end up winning the World Series against the Brooklyn Dodgers 4 games to 1. So in the 1940s, the Yankees won 5 AL pennants and won 4 of the 5 World Series: 1941, 1943, 1947, and 1949. So now we enter the 1950s. And during the 1950 season, starting pitcher Whitey Ford would make his MLB debut. The second season under Stengel's watch again proved to be successful as the Yankees won a competitive AL pennant and went on to sweep the Whiz Kids in the World Series. Whiz Kids were the Philadelphia Phillies. This was like their best chance to win a World Series up to this point in their history. And before the season began, Whitey Ford would enlist to fight in the Korean War. Early on in the 1951 season, outfielder Mickey Mantle would make his debut. Now, the Yankees would win the AL and the World Series once again with all the firepower. Following the season, Joe DiMaggio would retire from baseball. So, yes, DiMaggio's gone, but guess what? Now you got this kid named Mickey Mantle who got a year with DiMaggio on his team. So, the Yankees and Dodgers would meet in the 1952 World Series, and the Yankees would win 4 games to 3. Prior to the 1953 season, Whitey Ford would return from the Korean War to the Yankees. Now, the 1953 Yankees would once again make the World Series, and they would once again win the World Series, this time 4 games to 2. Now, this was a Major League Baseball record, fifth consecutive World Series title. Now, the 1954 Yankees would win 106 games, but surprisingly, that was only good enough for second in the AL behind the Cleveland team. And during the 1955 season, catcher slash outfielder Elston Howard would make his debut. Now, he was the Yankees' first player to break the color barrier. So the Yankees would return to the World Series in 1955, where the Dodgers would finally triumph over their city rivals 4 games to 3. So in August of 1956, Phil Rizzuto was released by the Yankees. This was a bit of an oddity because they called him into the office. They were talking to him, and they're like, "Hey, so who do you think the team would be better without during the postseason run?" And Rizzuto was like, "Oh, well, there's this guy. No, no, we need him. Oh, well, I don't think we need that extra guy in the in the outfield. No, no, we need him. He's a key piece. Well, there's this other guy. No, 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 we need him. You." And they just released him. It was a bit of a controversial moment, but so the Yankees again would win the AL pennant in 1956, and they would meet with their crosstown Brooklyn Dodgers once more. So with the series tied at 2 apiece during Game 5, Don Larson would throw his perfect game in the World Series. This was obviously the highlight of his career, and it is the only perfect game in Major League Baseball postseason history, and obviously World Series history. So the Yankees would end up winning the World Series. In 1957, the Yankees would have yet another stellar season, but this time they would lose in the World Series to the Milwaukee Braves. So after the 1957 season, the Giants and the Dodgers both left the city of New York for Los Angeles and San Francisco, respectively. So this left the Yankees as the lone team in New York City. So obviously, a lot of people were upset about that, especially the NL fans, but the Yankees weren't. Some expected them to see their attendance numbers spike, but it didn't happen because a lot of people were very upset with the Dodgers and the Giants leaving. They were diehard Dodgers fans for, 60, 70 years, or Giants fans for that long. And then the team just left. So, yeah, I mean, my grandma was a Dodgers fan. And when they left, she didn't become a Yankees fan. Her dad didn't become a Yankees fan. They're just like, okay, whatever. What's it matter? So the team would actually, like I was kind of insinuating, they would see their attendance numbers decline. And this was despite the fact that they had actually won yet another AL pennant and a World Series in 1958. Now, they would avenge their previous series loss to the Braves by beating them in the 1958 World Series. And the team would stumble a bit in 1959, finishing third in the AL. So in the 1950s, the Yankees won 8 AL pennants and 6 World Series. The 1950, 1951, 1952, 1953, 1956, and 1958. So now we hit the 1960s. And before the 1960 season, the Yankees would acquire outfielder Roger Maris from the Athletics. And the team would make the World Series again, but they would lose. So after this World Series loss, Casey Stengel was actually fired by the team because they lost in the World Series. And again, it wasn't necessarily because he lost in the series, but it had to do with his age. So he was up there in age, and during the press conference, he kind of joked around. He's like, Well, the only reason I'm gone is because I'm not 10 years younger or something like that. So it was a bit of an oddity to just fire him like that, but they did. It was either fire, resign, retire, and they just ended up saying fired. But it depends on who you ask because some will say he resigned, some will say he got fired, some will say he retired. So in 1961, Roger Maris would break the single season home run record with 61, barely breaking it. So the team would go on to win 109 games, easily cruising to yet another American League pennant. They would win the World Series one more time. In 1962, the team again cruised their way through the AL as if nothing was there, winning another AL pennant where they would meet their former arch rival San Francisco Giants in the series, and they would defeat their former foes, still having their number 4 games to 3. So the Yankees would return to the World Series once more in 1963, but meeting their other former rival, LA Dodgers, they would actually get swept out by the Dodgers. So, following the series loss in 1963, Yogi Berra would retire from playing. He was actually hired as a manager for the 1964 season. So, the team responded well to the new manager and returned to the World Series. However, they would drop to the Cardinals 4 games to 3. Yogi Berra was actually fired after the season as the Yankees brass felt that he was not ready to manage a team as prestige as the New York Yankees. In other words, go to some garbage team, get some managerial experience, and then we'll hire you back. Now, this obviously drove a wedge between the Yankees and Yogi because he felt that he shouldn't have been fired. But following the 1964 season, CBS, the news network, would end up purchasing the New York Yankees. Now, the team was a little bit of fool's gold. The team was lacking in its minor league talent at this point and was one of the slower ones to sign African American players and integrate. So these factors, following with the introduction of the draft in 1965, began to chip away at the Yankees' domination. The empire was finally beginning to decline. So the Yankees would fall all the way to sixth place in 1965 and fell to dead last in 1966. So following the 66 season, Roger Maris was traded away. And in late 1967, Elston Howard was traded away. So, following the conclusion of the season, Whitey Ford announced his retirement. And I just want to point out here recently, like a couple weeks ago, Whitey Ford passed away. So, my condolences to him, his family. So, the team would manage to finish fifth in the American League in 1968. But before the 1969 season, Mickey Mantle announced his retirement. So, he had gone to spring training and he felt he wasn't up to the task, so he retired. Catcher Thurman Munson would make his debut during a forgettable 1969 season for the Yankees. So the 1960s saw the Yankees win 5 AL pennants and 2 World Series in 1961 and 1962. Now, the decade was dominant in the beginning, but fell apart in the end. So now we hit the 1970s and the Yankees would finish second in the American League East, the newly formed American League East, in 1970, but they were far out. They were far out of the picture. Yes, it was a second place finish, but it wasn't like a one game finish. It was a good, I think it was 10 and a half games or something like that out of the picture. So they would remain above 500 through the 1972 season, but they were never able to truly make a run for a playoff berth. So in January of 1973, CBS would sell the Yankees to George Steinbrenner. Now, the 1973 team seemed to respond well to the change in ownership with Steinbrenner's very hands on approach. And they would hold a first place lead in the American League East into August of 1973. But the team would fall apart, collapse, and finish fourth in the AL East. So, following the season, Yankee Stadium underwent a renovation project. Many around baseball had known that the stadium was in need of some maintenance, as it was apparent that chunks of missing concrete were visible. So you'd be sitting in the stands, you would look up and you would see a chunk of concrete that was missing, that had been cleaned up. So for the 1974 and 75 seasons, the Yankees had to play their home games at the Mets Shea Stadium until the Yankee Stadium's renovation projects were finished. So the Yankees seemed to like playing in Shea Stadium and almost won the AL East in 1974, finishing up only 2 games out of first. So the Yankees would end up signing free agent Catfish Hunter, pitcher, to a contract before the 1975 season. So Catfish Hunter is an interesting case. He was essentially the first Major League Baseball free agent. It was due to a random quirk in his contract where he was going to be a contract after the 75 season. He was going to be a free agent after the 1975 season. But what ended up happening is he had this weird clause in his contract with a physical, and the team had to release him after an arbitrary agreement. An arbitrator decided you have to get rid of him, and then Catfish Hunter went to the Yankees. So now with free agency, the Yankees were back in business, especially with Steinbrenner, who did not want to lose. So despite the addition of Catfish Hunter, the team would fall from second to third. Now, in 1976, the team would rebound and win the American League East for the first time since the league had expanded in 1969. And the Yankees would defeat the Kansas City Royals in the American League Championship Series, or ALCS, but they were swept by the Cincinnati Reds in the World Series. So the 1976 offseason saw the Yankees sign big name free agent outfielder Reggie Jackson. So Jackson was a controversial signing for the field as he had publicly bashed Thurman Munson in the past. Now, he didn't like Thurman Munson, who was, of course, at the point, captain of the team and was one of, if not their most known player at that point. So Jackson was good, but he just didn't get along with people. He didn't get along with the team's management. He didn't get along with George Steinbrenner. And Thurman Munson kind of was like, oh, well, it's fine. We need him to win. But there was probably rift behind the scenes. So this chapter of the Yankees' history earned a nickname, the Bronx Zoo. So the team was noted for its on field success, but off the field problems. So the team once more won the AL East and once more met with the Kansas City Royals in the ALCS. Once again, they would beat the Royals and would go on to face the Dodgers in the World Series. And they would finally snap their little bit of a World Series drought by beating the Dodgers 4 games to 2. Now, this marked the Yankees' first World Series title since 1962. So the 1978 season saw the Yankees earn their nickname, Bronx Zoo, as they had struggled by the middle of July, sat 14 games behind Boston. So manager Billy Martin criticized both Reggie Jackson and George Steinbrenner and quote unquote resigned. Odds are Steinbrenner said, "You're out of here. You want to get fired or you want to resign?" He resigned. He said, "Okay, yes, sir." So other players began to, display personality problems and infighting would occur off the field. Now, the team's new manager would help to turn the tide, and they found themselves 4 games behind Boston for the AL East crown in mid September. And as if it was by fate, the Yankees would meet up with the Red Sox in Boston for a crucial 4 game series. So this series would become known as the Boston Massacre, as the Yankees went on to sweep the series while outscoring the Red Sox 42-9. The Yankees and the Red Sox would meet in a winner take all game 163, of which the Yankees, having just swept their rivals, would emerge victorious. They would again get past the Royals in the ALCS to face off with their familiar foes, the LA Dodgers, in the World Series. The Yankees would take the series 4 games to 2. Now, in 1979, the Yankees started off well, but the team would suffer an unfortunate accident. So on August 2nd, 1979, Thurman Munson passed away after his Cessna plane would crash during a landing attempt. So interestingly enough, Munson had lived in Ohio, and his family was in Ohio. So he wanted to get his pilot's license. He had a plane, and his goal was to fly, to and from Ohio. And it was rumored that he was actually going to retire after the 1979 season, or asked to be traded to Cleveland or Cincinnati to be closer to his family. And he ends up, like I said, he crashed during a landing attempt with his instructors. And the instructors got out and survived, but Thurman Munson had suffered very bad damage. And odds are he was going to be paralyzed for the rest of his life if he had lived. He ends up passing away from smoke inhalation and all that. Interestingly enough, my grandpa was actually very close friends with Thurman Munson. He had a very close off the field relationship with him. It's more or less because my grandpa was a military and Munson had wanted to join the military, and they really hit it off. So my grandpa had actually gone into the Yankees clubhouse, and at multiple times I'd gone to the Yankees clubhouse, brought my mom and my uncles, and he was, like I said, very close with Thurman Munson. So he was obviously distraught at the news of Thurman Munson, a close friend of his, passing away. And he actually was able to go to the private funeral of Thurman Munson, which very, very interesting to know. Um, Ideally, I'll be doing a player bio of Thurman Munson, and I will be talking to my grandfather about Thurman Munson, and I'll get a lot of interesting, hopefully, get a lot of interesting stories about Thurman Munson to tell you all. But getting back into the history of here, so obviously the death of their captain Thurman Munson was too much for the Yankees, and they would fall to fourth in the American League. After the season, Catfish Hunter would retire. So the 1970s saw the Yankees win 3 AL pennants and 2 World Series in 1977 and 1978. So in the 1980s, the Yankees would return to the postseason in 1980, but the Kansas City Royals finally got over the Yankees, winning their first AL crown, and the Yankees would go home. Now, before the 1981 season, the team would sign free agent outfielder Dave Winfield to a then record 10-year, $23 million deal. That was a records breaking, record shattering deal back then. Now, the Yankees would win the AL East in 1981 and then got past the Milwaukee Brewers to make it to the World Series. Yes, at this point, the Brewers were an American League ball club. So they would lose to the World Series to their former rival LA Dodgers 4 games to 2. After the 1981 season, Reggie Jackson left the team. Now, the Bronx Zoo had definitely left a disgusting, dirty stain on the Yankees off the field, but with Jackson gone, that was something. That helped a little bit. Now, the Yankees would struggle to sign free agents as nobody really wanted to join an organization that was known for its off the field problems. And you couldn't just throw money at everyone. They kind of would say, okay, tell you what. Um, yeah. So what players would do is they would go to the Yankees and they would say, hmm, hey, how much are you willing to pay me? And they would say, okay, we'll give you a 5 year, $7.5 million deal. And they would go to the team that they wanted to go to, like the Reds, and say, hey, Yankees offered me 5 years, 7.5. Oh, okay, we'll give you a 5 year, $8.5 million deal. So they would just use the Yankees as a bargaining chip. Or if nobody else wanted to offer them, they would just pretend to have higher offers, and then they would go to the Yankees, and then they would kind of fade into obscurity, but they got their payday. So it was something for the Yankees. So George Steinbrenner was obviously known for being very temperamental. He would constantly change managers, and he had numerous well documented feuds with players, including Reggie Jackson and Dave Winfield, which we will get to shortly. So Steinbrenner had also had a strategy. He tried a strategy that was implemented by Bill Veeck back in the early 1970s. He would try to trade young prospects to other teams in exchange for veterans, with the hope that the veterans would help the Yankees, return to the promised land in the AL pennant in the World Series. Now, just like it had happened with the Chicago White Sox, this strategy backfired, and sports writer Buster Olney discussed in he discussed the practice in his book, The Last Night of the Yankees Dynasty. And he called it, quote, a practice that ultimately inflicted serious damage on the organization, leaving the team without the needed influx of young and cheap talent, end quote. So the Yankees fell to fifth in 1982, but they would see first baseman Don Mattingly make his MLB debut in September of that year. Following that year, the Yankees rose to third place in the AL East, but it was not good enough for Steinbrenner or for the team to be considered a World Series favorite. So by 1984, the Yankees had a very strong offense, but said offense was full of players past their prime. So to make matters worse, the team's pitching staff was pitiful, awful. So other teams would just make games that should have been competitive. So the Yankees would lose a lot of games with a score of like 8-6 because their pitching couldn't keep the ball in the park and their hitting, as good as it wasn't the murderer's row. So the team had the league's leader in batting average in Don Mattingly and the player who came in second average with Dave Winfield. But despite having the hitting, they didn't have the pitching. So they finished 87 and 75, which was good for third in the division. Now, the Yankees would continue to invest in their offense before the 1985 season when they would acquire outfielder Ricky Henderson in a trade. Now, the Yankees' offense was led by an MVP season from Don Mattingly and was again electric in 1985. But the team finished 2 games out of a playoff berth. Now, the team remained in second place the following season, but they would fall back to mediocrity after once again starting in the 1987 season, and they would remain in the middle of the AL East for 87 and 88 seasons. As a response, they would trade Ricky Henderson back to Oakland midway through a mediocre 1989 season. And oddly enough, the Yankees had actually had the most wins of any MLB team in the 1980s, but they would only make the postseason 2 times during that decade, and one of which they got swept in the ALCS, the other they lost in the World Series. So the team won one AL pennant, but it wasn't a World Series victory. So now we're getting to the 1990s. And midway through the 1990 season, Dave Winfield was traded. Now, this trade had been expected for some time, as it was well known and well documented that Steinbrenner and Winfield did not get along. Now, this is just a little story on what I mean by Steinbrenner and Winfield did not get along. So the problems that started as soon as the ink on Winfield's contract had hit the paper, so the ink was still wet. And Steinbrenner had publicly stated that he had thought that the team had signed Winfield to a $16 million deal, not 23. Right off the bat, he was already criticizing his team's new player. So things did not get better from there, as Steinbrenner would publicly insult him, Winfield. So in 1985, Steinbrenner stated, quote, "Where is Reggie Jackson? We need a Mr. October or a Mr. September. Winfield is Mr. May," end quote. So basically, Steinbrenner was saying, Winfield, he's good in the regular season, but where is he in the playoffs? Where is this guy? So Steinbrenner would also leak false stories about Winfield to the press, hoping that Winfield would waive his 10-5 rights to agree to be traded. Side note, 10-5 rights are where a veteran who has been in the league with 10 years and on the team that he is currently on for 5 years has the right to waive say, no, I don't want to be traded. He can void all trades. So essentially, you could try to trade him to the worst team in the league, and a guy with 10-5 rights could say, nope, don't want to do that. Sorry. Before being traded in 1990, Winfield and Steinbrenner had yet another moment. So Steinbrenner had paid a very well-known gambler $40,000 for information that would sabotage Winfield's career. Once the league found out about this, Steinbrenner was banned from baseball for life. Now, this suspension would only end up lasting 2 seasons, but it was clear that Winfield had to leave the team before Steinbrenner resorted to more drastic means to rid himself of Winfield. Now, what do I mean by that? With how things were going, it wouldn't have shocked me to hear Steinbrenner called out a hit on the guy. So now, this is what led to Winfield finally agreeing to waive his 10-5 rights And the off the field drama took its toll on the Yankees as they ended the 1990 season with a bad 67-95 record, which was dead last in the AL East. Now, the temporary ban of Steinbrenner actually helped the Yankees as he couldn't touch the team, he couldn't put his hands on approach. So the team would see its new GM allow the young prospects in the system to grow in New York rather than trading them for old veterans. Now, the new GM would also begin to acquire left-handed batters who could more take advantage of Yankee Stadium's shorter right field fence. So during the 1991 season, outfielder Bernie Williams would make his MLB debut. After the season, the Yankees signed manager Buck Showalter to head the organization. Now, he was a great fit in the short term as he began to give the young kids more playing time. Now, obviously, young players starting and playing a lot is good for your long-term future, but it doesn't help you in the short term. So they had a rotten 1991 season, but they had one of the top picks in the 1992 season. Now they netted the sixth overall pick, which they would use to select shortstop Derek Jeter. And before the 1993 season, the Yankees would sign third baseman Wade Boggs in free agency. So the addition of Boggs helped the Yankees jump back to second in the AL East in 1993. In 1994, the team would jump into first place in the AL East and looked ready to compete for the World Series once more for the first time in a while. However, the season was cut short due to a player strike. Very interesting moment there. Particularly, this season's known as the Expos real shot, but the Yankees also got hurt. So from there, things would only go up for the Yankees. So during the 1995 season, the Core Four, as they were known, all made their MLB debuts. The Core Four was the nickname for the four players that were obviously key pieces of a Yankees dynasty. And those players were shortstop Derek Jeter, relief pitcher slash closer Mariano Rivera, catcher Jorge Posada, and starting pitcher Andy Pettitte. So the team would finish second in the AL East, but expanded playoffs saw them sneak in with a wild card berth. Now they were knocked out in the first round of the ALDS. After the 1995 season, Don Mattingly announced his retirement, and Buck Showalter was effectively forced to resign as manager of the team. And what happened was Steinbrenner had wanted Showalter to fire his hitting coach, but Showalter said, "I'm not doing that. No, this guy's always been loyal. He's been a great friend of mine." So Steinbrenner said, "Okay, well, then you can either fire him or you can resign." So Showalter resigned. Hitting coach ends up leaving with him, and it hurt. It definitely hurt Steinbrenner, or it definitely hurt Showalter. But what are you gonna do? And the Yankees would end up hiring Joe Torre as manager following Showalter's resignation. So in 1996, the Yankees were led by a Rookie of the Year performance from Derek Jeter, as well as a Cy Young runner-up in Andy Pettitte. So the team would win the AL East for the first time since 1980 and looked poised to make a run for the postseason. The Yankees cruised to the AL pennant. It would meet up with the Atlanta Braves in the World Series. Now, the Braves easily took the first two games of the series with a combined score of 16-1, but the Yankees would storm back and would win games 3 through 6, winning their first World Series title since the 1978 season. The team actually had a slightly better year in 1997, but would lose in the American League Divisional Series to the Cleveland team. After the 1997 season, Wade Boggs would leave the Yankees as a free agent, joining the newly founded Tampa Bay Devil Rays. So, what they end up doing before the 1998 season is they hire Brian Cashman to become the team's new general manager. In April of 1998, an 18-inch long beam fell onto a seat before a game happened. So at this point, it was clear Yankee Stadium needed either to be completely fixed up again or they needed a new stadium because that's obviously a hazard. And this whole thing led to multiple inspections, which eventually which cost the Yankees a few home games because, I mean, a beam fell onto a seat. So you're not going to open the stadium to the public unless you really want a potential lawsuit coming in. So, this began to lead to many questioning keeping the old stadium open despite all the history that had happened there. Now, the Yankees would improve even more in the 1998 season, starting the season on fire. By August, they were 76 and 27. The team would finish 114 and 48. They easily won the AL East, beating the second place Boston Red Sox by 22 games. The Yankees would easily win the World Series, only losing 2 games in the 13 games they played in the postseason. As for their World Series win, after their World Series win, the Yankees would trade for starting pitcher Roger Clemens. The team would again make the playoffs in 1999, again push through the playoffs without a problem at all, and this was capped off with a 4-1 series victory in the ALCS over their arch rival Boston Red Sox and a sweeping of the Atlanta Braves in the World Series. Interesting side note, my parents actually got to go to this game, got to go to game 3 of that World Series. And yeah, just a little interesting side note. Perks of being in Connecticut. And the Yankees were looking like the Yankees of the past. So the Yankees won 3 AL pennants in the 1990s and won all 3 World Series of which they participated: 1996, 1998, and 1999. So now we're in the 2000s. And the 2000 Yankees would make the playoffs once more, sneaking past the Athletics in the ALDS and defeating the, at the time, best record in baseball, Seattle Mariners, in the ALCS. So they would meet with the Mets in the Subway Series 2000 World Series. So the Yankees would win the series 4 games to 1. After the season ended, the team would sign free agent starting pitcher Mike Mussina. So the team had a strong 2001, but they had to freeze their play after the 9/11 terrorist attacks. Now, the Yankees would rally from a 2-0 deficit in the ALDS and defeated the World Series favorite Seattle Mariners 4 games to 1 in the ALCS. That was actually the record breaking year for Seattle, my bad. And they would meet with the Arizona Diamondbacks in the 2001 World Series, but shockingly fell to the Diamondbacks 4 games to 3. And for the Yankees, the team was actually about to enter a phase of disappointment by Yankee standards. So, New York would win its 5th consecutive AL East title, but they would lose in the ALDS to the eventual World Series champion Anaheim Angels. And the team ended up signing Japanese outfield free agent Hideki Matsui prior to the 2003 season. Now, this would lead to Boston's CEO calling the Yankees the evil empire. Now, obviously, this did not sit well with people in Yankees management or the players on the Yankees and led to numerous battles between the Yankees and the Red Sox. And tensions would escalate between the two teams, which led to the rivalry becoming one of, if not the biggest rivalry in sports in the world. Definitely in baseball, no doubt. In the world, it's possible. It's possible. Now, as if it was planned, the Yankees and the Red Sox would meet in the 2003 ALCS. Now, Game 3 was notable for the brawl that broke out between the two teams, in which Boston pitcher Pedro Martinez would throw the Yankees' 72-year-old coach Don Zimmer to the ground. Now, obviously, after the fact, after that had happened, Zimmer said, I let my hot head get to me. I shouldn't have done that. I shouldn't have charged Pedro." And Pedro was like, "Well, he charged me, so." And obviously, this led to the New York media painting Pedro as a villain, and this led to the Boston media saying Yankees are clueless; they can't control their coaches. So the series would go to a game 7, which the Yankees would win. Unfortunately for New York, they would lose to the Florida Marlins in the World Series. Following the 2003 season, Andy Pettitte and Roger Clemens would both leave the team during free agency. On the flip side, the team would trade for third baseman Alex Rodriguez, adding even more power to a deadly lineup. Now, despite the pitching losses, the offense helped carry the Yankees back to the playoffs, where, as fate would have it, they would meet in the ALCS once more with their arch rival, Boston Red Sox. Now, the Yankees would take a commanding 3-0 lead in the 2004 ALCS, but the Red Sox would complete the comeback and won the series 4 games to 3-7, shocking many as this was the first time in Major League Baseball history that a team came back from a 3-0 deficit to win the series. And of course, it had to happen between the Yankees and the Red Sox. You couldn't have planned it any better. Now, the 2005 and 2006 seasons were eerily similar for the Yankees, as the team would win the AL East in both seasons, but they would lose in the ALDS. After the 2006 season, Bernie Williams would leave the team. On the bright side, Andy Pettitte came back. In May of 2007, Roger Clemens returned to the Yankees on a 1-year deal. Unfortunately for him, the team would fall in the ALDS. And following after yet another disappointing exit from the playoffs, Joe Torre would leave the Yankees in 2007. Now, this was due to a contract dispute. So the team would replace him with Joe Girardi. George Steinbrenner had also effectively stepped down from his role due to his declining health and older age, leading his two sons, Hank and Hal, to take his place. So Hank Steinbrenner poured more gasoline in the fire with the Red Sox in 2008 when he said, quote, Red Sox Nation, what a bunch of bull that is. That was a creation of the Boston Red Sox, ESPN, and ESPN, which is filled with Red Sox fans. Go anywhere in America and you won't see Boston hats and jackets. You'll see Yankees hats and jackets. This is a Yankee country. We're going to put the Yankees back on top and restore the universe to order. End quote. This, of course, upset a lot of Boston fans and, like I said, poured more gasoline on the fire between the two teams in the rivalry. So the Yankees hosted the All-Star game in 2008, but the team would fail to make the World Series playoffs. Now, the 2008 All-Star game is the first All-Star game I remember watching the full thing because they had a whole massive preseason or, pre-game festivities where they had a bunch of former Yankees players there because this was the last year of the old Yankee Stadium. So they showed a bunch of the old veterans and old players, I should say. Some of them were veterans from World War II and Korean War. And they were all there and they're collecting sand from the pitching mound or plucking some grass and putting it in baggies for themselves because it was a very, very emotional moment for a lot of Yankees fans and a lot of people in baseball in general. So the team would move to the newly constructed new Yankee Stadium, for the 2009 season. Now, Mike Mussina had also retired after the 2008 season. So the Steinbrenner family, not happy about missing out on the playoffs in 2008, committed a ton of money to players' salaries prior to the 2009 season. Now, this saw the team sign starting pitchers or free agent CC Sabathia and first baseman Mark Teixeira. So the Yankees steamrolled their way back into the postseason, following a massive power improvement from the previous season, in part due to Mark Teixeira. Now, they would cruise to the World Series where they would defeat the Phillies 4 games to 2. After the World Series win, Hideki Matsui would leave the team in free agency. Now, in the 2000s, the Yankees would win 4 AL pennants and 2 World Series in 2000 and 2009, respectively. Now, I've mentioned this before, but the signing of Mark Teixeira actually ended up leading the Yankees to giving up a first round pick in the 2009 draft, which was given to the Angels, which led to the Angels selecting outfielder Mike Trout, whom the Yankees were allegedly very fascinated in and were going to take him if they had a chance. So let that sink in. The Yankees almost had Mike Trout. Yeah, I know. So now we're in the 2010s, and the Yankees would begin the new decade with a good start, but in July of 2010, George Steinbrenner would pass away. Now, the team would end up losing the ALCS to the Texas Rangers. 2011 saw Derek Jeter break 3,000 career hits, while Mariano Rivera recorded his major league record 602nd save. The team made it to the postseason but lost in the ALDS. After the 2011 season, Jorge Posada retired. They again would fall in the ALCS or in the ALCS, but this time they would fall to the Detroit Tigers. The 2013 Yankees were drastically hampered by injuries and missed out on the playoffs. After the season, both Mariano Rivera and Andy Pettitte retired. So the team would sign free agent starting pitcher Masahiro Tanaka again from Japan before the 2014 season. Now, following the season, Derek Jeter would hang up his cleats and retire. So at this point, the core four is done. In late 2015, starting pitcher Luis Severino and catcher Gary Sanchez would make their debuts. Now, the team would return to the playoffs that year, but were eliminated in the wild card play-in game. In August of 2016, Alex Rodriguez was essentially forced to retire as a player. This was due to PEDs and his contract being so much money. So they kind of told him, "You're done," and he didn't have a choice. So he just said yes and he retired. So the team would see outfielder Aaron Judge, make his debut shortly after the retirement of Rodriguez. And at the conclusion of the season, outfielder or first baseman Mark Teixeira retired. So the Yankees began a little bit of a youth movement starting in 2017. The team would return to the postseason and push their way to the ALCS, where they would lose to the eventual World Series champions Houston Astros in 7 games. After the loss, Joe Girardi's contract was up, and the Yankees decided to let him go. So the Yankees would acquire powerful outfielder Giancarlo Stanton prior to the 2018 season. During the campaign, yet another young player, shortstop second baseman Gleyber Torres, would make his debut. The 2018 Yankees set the MLB single season record for homers, but that record only lasts 1 year as the 2019 Minnesota Twins would break it. They would make the playoffs, but they would fall to the Boston Red Sox, eventual World Series Boston Red Sox in the ALDS. So it's interesting to note here 2017, 2018, Yankees were knocked out by the 2017 Astros, 2018 Red Sox. Both of those teams have their titles with asterisks by them due to cheating scandals. So Yankees fans feel like they were cheated out of 2 potential World Series appearances. So the 2019 Yankees looked very good going to the playoffs, sweeping Minnesota and set themselves up with a date with the Houston Astros, who were still using their cheating to get there. And the Yankees would lose to the Astros once more, closing out the decade without a World Series win. After the loss, CC Sabathia officially retired as a player. So in the 2010s, the Yankees had 0 World Series appearances. Now, 2020s. So the Yankees dealt with numerous injuries during the 2020 campaign, but they made their way to the playoffs in the expanded playoff format. They would win in the ALDS, but they would fall in the ALCS to the Tampa Bay Rays, eventually AL champion Tampa Bay Rays in a very close fought series. So, the Yankees have won a record 40 AL pennants and a record 27 World Series. Those 2 records are unprecedented considering the league has only been around since 1901 or 1903 for the World Series. So, yeah, the Yankees have been dominant. 61 people with ties to the Yankees are in the Hall of Fame. Whether they're a player like Catfish Hunter, who spent a couple years in New York, or Reggie Jackson, who spent a couple years in New York, a superstar like Babe Ruth, Lou Gehrig, who spent all of their career in New York, a coach like Casey Stengel, who spent the majority of his well-known coaching career with the Yankees, or even a manager like John McGraw, who left the team after only 1.5 years in Baltimore, who was obviously in the Hall of Fame as a Giant. They all count. And interestingly enough, Thurman Munson is not among those players. I would love to see Munson in the Hall of Fame, but it's not likely. So 61 people with ties to the Yankees are in the Hall. Now they have 21 retired numbers, which honor 23 different players. Those numbers are, in order, Number 1 retired for Billy Martin. Number 2 for Derek Jeter. Number 3 for Babe Ruth. Number 4 for Lou Gehrig. Number 5 for Joe DiMaggio. Number 6 for Joe Torre. Number 7, Mickey Mantle. Number 8, which was retired for 2 players in Bill Dickey and Yogi Berra. Number 9 for Roger Maris. Number 10 for Phil Rizzuto. Number 15 for Thurman Munson. Number 16 for Whitey Ford. Number 20 for Jorge Posada. 23, Don Mattingly. 32, Elston Howard. 37, Casey Stengel. 42 was retired for 2 players, and Jackie Robinson, obviously, league wide retired. And Mariano Rivera, who was the last player in Major League history to wear number 42, as he was wearing 42 before the Major League Baseball decided to universally retire it league wide. He was grandfathered into being allowed to wear it. Number 44, Reggie Jackson. Number 46, Andy Pettit. Number 49, Ron Guidry. And number 51, Bernie Williams. Now, obviously, I mentioned every player on that list there except Ron Guidry. Um, yeah, I couldn't mention every single player. I couldn't go into detail on every single World Series or every single season as much as I'd like to, because obviously we're at the hour 15-minute mark, and I did not want to keep going and make this a 3-hour video. I could have easily done it. I could have kept going, but I know that it's not in the best interest of you all. Again, this is kind of treated as a podcast to an extent. I didn't want to have the camera on for so long. But I hope you guys enjoyed this. This was the history of the New York Yankees. It took a long time to get this whole thing done. I'm sure you've known that. Um, it's been it's been a pleasure here doing this one. It took a while. Like I said in the beginning of the video, I was thinking about getting this video back out in late May at the latest. Honestly, it might have been July or it might have been April where I discussed it for the first time openly. It just kept getting delayed and pushed back, and here we are. We're done. Again, that was History of the New York Yankees with a couple little interesting side stories there, particularly about Thurman Munson. So if you guys enjoyed this, please make sure to leave a like or subscribe. Leave a comment, please. I appreciate anything like that. It's been it's been a long ride with us here at Heartland Sports. We've been out for about 7, 8 months, 8 months at this point. And this is one video we've been promising for a while, which is great because I had just released a Ricky Williams trade breakdown at the time of this recording here. And that was another video I've wanted to do for a long time. So they both took a long time to get done. So yeah, please make sure to leave a like, subscribe, leave a comment, please. I appreciate it. If you have any suggestions for improvement or anything like that, I would appreciate it. But I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. That was the history of the New York Yankees.